Well, we got one more show before Election Day coming up. Then to be
Yeah,
next
13
Wednesday.
days. 13 days to the election. Lucky
13 days
13.
till the most important midterm election ever, I guess. We say that every election, but this time it really seems to be true. But here we are on October 24th. It definitely feels like fall is here in a big way. And the Red Sox are going to be playing in the second game of the World Series. Shortly we have to go off the air, but you can watch this entire show and not miss a pitch. And we have a great guest here tonight to be part of the show. We're going to talk about constitutional amendments that are on the ballot that you will be facing. And some of you may already be considering in absentee voting. And we're going to talk about that with two fine guests from the ACLU of New Hampshire. And we'll get to them in a minute, but I understand that first we have a POTUS report.
We will start again, Bob. It's becoming increasingly difficult for me to come up with a good POTUS report before the shows, but I'm not going to give up until I absolutely have nothing more left in me. I had something in mind, and then we had the terrible situation today where we had some very serious violence directed against a virtual who's who of Trump enemies.
Right.
Literally, the six locations that were targeted have individually and CNN as an organization have been named by the president at his rallies as enemies. An interesting term used. I've been in politics a long time. When I've been a candidate, it's always been my understanding that the people I'm running against are my opponents, not my enemies. But that distinction seems to have been blurred.
Now.
Yeah, it's not like that anymore, and so they're coming at us. They're going to beat the libs with bombs, I guess now. So I'm going to. My thought was then I'm going to talk about that, and I am briefly. Just want to hit on a theme that we've hit on this show many times. Watch what he does, not what he says. The president came out and read some very charming words condemning this violence. From a teleprompter written by somebody else. I've seen him in front of the rope line, in front of the helicopter, going on and on and on, ad-libbing, but he did nothing about ad-libbing today, about what was in his heart, about what's really going on with these violent attacks. He read the words that he was told to read, and he stopped. Okay, those are his words. Never mind what he says. Let's see what he does tonight. He has a rally tonight. Let's see when they start yelling, lock her up, when they start turning on the press, is he going to stop them or is he going to encourage them? We'll watch. His actions will speak louder than words. But then I was going to talk about that, but then I heard on my ride in here, breaking news. I don't have a lot of information about it, but apparently both the Russians and the Chinese have succeeded in hacking into President Trump's iPhone and have been listening in on his private conversations and have been using information gleaned in order to form their methods of dealing with the president on foreign policy. More to come on that, I'm sure. And this is in a direct result of his utter refusal to follow the national security protocols that have been in place for years. They've been made known to him, and he's refused to follow them. So that's where we are. I know everybody's going to be watching the Red Sox, but every now and then I encourage you, turn to Fox. Let's take a look at this rally. Let's see if his actions match his lame words from this afternoon.
Wow. Yeah.
It's coming like a fire hose, Bob. I can't keep up. I don't know how long I can keep this up, Bob. You're killing me.
Well, geez, I just was at an event up at the Sununu Youth Center where they have a new facility they're just getting ready to open for dealing with youth in the thralls of substance abuse. And I had to park right beside somebody who had a bumper sticker and I said Trump 2020, and I went, oh my God.
You gotta wonder.
First one of those I've seen.
You gotta wonder. I don't hear him condemning anything. I certainly heard the president of CNN come out and tie this to the rhetoric, pretty much.
Yeah.
When you encourage violence against the press, and then a newsman is murdered by a close friend of your son-in-law, and CNN has to be evacuated in downtown Manhattan because there's a bomb. It's let's connect the dots, people.
Yeah, let's do. Well,
and
anyway,
let's remind folks to call in too.
Oh yeah, let's. We welcome callers, of course. We hope you will participate. We are at 640-3091, and we hope that you're out there and will choose to join us as we get going on our program. But I think I now want to turn to the subject we're going to discuss today. There are on the ballot you're going to get for the November election. Some of you already got this ballot because absentee votes are already being cast in this state. There are 2 constitutional amendments, Question 1 and Question 2, quite obviously. And we're going to talk about those with strong proponents of each of those constitutional amendments from the ACLU New Hampshire, Jeannie Haruska, their policy director. I'm very involved in one of these amendments, Constitutional Amendment 1. I've been a sponsor of that CACR, which is the name of the vehicle by which they get through the legislature. These constitutional amendments have to be approved by the New Hampshire legislature with a 2/3 vote, both in the House of Representatives and the New Hampshire Senate. Question 1 was overwhelmingly approved in both bodies by very substantial margins, overwhelming margins. Question 2 is a much closer vote. That has to deal with the privacy issue. So we're going to want to talk about that. And then when we've had some discussion about that and hopefully enlighten folks, help them choose how to vote on these, we're going to go to the issue of voting rights in New Hampshire, because that's been much in the news.
Had a court case just
decided, I guess the day before yesterday, right, by Superior Court Judge Kenneth Brown, who issued a preliminary injunction against the enforcement of the provisions of Senate Bill 3.
And the TRO was denied, so that
No, the TRO was granted.
the preliminary injunction was granted, but my understanding was the temporary restraining order did not get granted, or am I mistaken in my understanding of it?
My reading, and for the viewers, my name is Henry Clementowicz, and I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU of New Hampshire. My understanding is that Judge Brown did not vacate the TRO, which had been in effect. So
Oh, it wasn't, then I was mistaken, I stand
the
corrected.
order doesn't mention the TRO. I read it as the TRO stays in place regarding the penalties.
Okay.
We'll get to that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. But first, I'd like to, know that welcome addition there, I'd like to turn to Jeannie and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, what your position is, and why you think the voters should approve these 2 constitutional amendments.
So I'm Jeannie Haruska. I'm the policy director for ACLU New Hampshire. I'm the chief lobbyist, basically. I'm the one that you see at the State House dealing with all the legislation that we follow. On any given year, we track roughly 200 bills and actively...
200 bills ACLU
Yeah,
was interested
so,
in? Holy cow.
light work.
That's I'm shocked to hear that number, that would deal with civil liberties, that would be in your bailiwick.
Yeah,
That's
you'd
a
be
lot.
surprised how many issues will, one way or another, infringe on them. Including CACR 15 and CACR 16, or as what people see them on their ballot as Question 1 and Question 2. So Question 1, which the representative strongly supports, is taxpayer standing, which is actually something that we had in New Hampshire for 150 years prior to 2014, when the New Hampshire Supreme Court struck it down. But in essence, what it means is that by virtue of being a taxpayer, you have automatic standing to sue the government. So the ACLU supports this because it is the means by which the government is held accountable, right? The government operates by spending your tax money. You should absolutely have the right to sue the government and hold them accountable for how they spend your tax money. So we've been operating in the last few years without this, and it's been a detriment. I want to flag, actually, the applicability to it to the SB3 case. When the SB3 case was litigated a couple months ago, the government's lead defense was that the plaintiffs didn't have standing to sue the government. They didn't have standing because we don't have taxpayer standing, and so they had to come up with another means of it. If we had taxpayer standing, the plaintiffs in SB3 would have had automatic standing, and the government wouldn't have had that defense.
They wouldn't have to portray themselves as a voter who was denied access or some other way to get into the
Correct.
courthouse, some wrong. We've done a show on that, Bob, actually,
I think
previously.
we did, yeah.
But I'm happy to say we have a caller. We got Jack on the line, it looks like.
Hey, Jack. You're on the air. Happy to have you join us. Go right ahead if you can hear us.
You there, Jack? No, looks like we must have lost him.
Okay, Jack. We'll put you on if you want to call back. You know, sometimes we have to have a little discussion before we have a point where we can interrupt or take your calls, but we certainly do want to welcome callers. So if you want to get back on the line, we'll try and get to you real fast. You just said something that was really interesting to me about this. There was an intersection between this and the SB3 decision, you say? Can you
There-
explain that?
They don't actually relate in real life because we don't have taxpayer standing right now, so it hasn't come up in the SB3 case.
Yeah.
Well, it was a
But
hurdle that
it would have applied had we had taxpayer standing.
It looks like we got Jack back.
Try the
I'm a
online.
poet. We're going to put him on line 2.
Hey, Jack, you with us this time? Hello?
Jack, I'm going to hit this button again. If I lose you, please dial back in. Doesn't seem to be working. This line seems to be out. If we can get him over on line 1, we'd love to take the call.
Having
No,
one problem
this,
here today.
This phone line isn't working.
Okay. So, taxpayer standing, as you say, Jeannie, it appears that we've had this for a long time in New Hampshire. And the Supreme Court decided that, first they if I'm remembering this correctly, first they decided that in a particular case, I think it was Bill Duncan's case against the diversion of public funds to private schools, the voucher program. First they decided that that the statute didn't authorize it. The general court responded by authorizing it, and then they made it a constitutional decision that the legislature lacked the power to grant taxpayer standing. Hence, we have this constitutional amendment on the ballot.
Correct. If it's not going to work in statute, then it should absolutely be in the Constitution. The government doesn't operate but for your tax money. You should absolutely be able to hold that government accountable, and that includes for civil rights violations, because when they violate your civil rights, they're generally spending money in the process.
Yep, yep.
So can I, we got,
Jack's
it looks
back.
like we got Jack back. I'll hold my question because I want to try to get him on the show.
Hey, Jack.
Jack, are you there? I think I hear you, Jack. You may want to turn your TV down because we're on a little bit of a delay in case one of us swears. So turn your
I'm not
TV.
going to swear. Don't worry about it.
Oh, not you, me.
Welcome. Go right ahead with your question or
All
comment.
right. I just spent 13 days in Ireland. I traveled all the way from Dublin down to Kinsale and up to Westport. I traveled in Galway. I traveled everywhere else. And I'll tell you something. This president is an embarrassment to the world. These people won't even. I said to him, I'm Canadian. I was embarrassed. But I'll tell you, these people are so embarrassed. This guy acts like a fourth grader. Of course, he speaks like a fourth grader, and he acts like what's his name. And what's going on in the world? They're not troubled because in Ireland they just don't care. But I'll tell you, I learned so much when I was in Ireland about our political system, and I look back and go, "Oh my God, I'm afraid to go back." Thank you.
Thank you for the call. Sometimes stepping away and looking at it from a different perspective, it can be enlightening.
Well, my
But,
friends that live in Europe have the same, including my son who lives in London, they have the same exact reaction. It's pretty distressing, but not necessarily the subject of this program. I wonder how Jack feels about the Brexit vote, because that, really impacts the Republic of Ireland, because now...
that's a huge issue.
Huge issue.
I hear they're
Huge
talking
issue.
about actually placing the tariff border in the Irish Sea so as to avoid the hard border on the island, which is a big problem. And I don't know how you justify that from
What do you
a
have?
legal
What do you have?
perspective.
British revenue cutters?
I have no idea how they're going to do it, but that I am not mistaken about. That actually is being discussed as a possible way to avoid the hard border on the island of Ireland,
Oh my goodness.
which is something that neither side wants.
Yeah, that's right. Well, my goodness, we're told can this be true? We're already up
It's
against our
true.
first break?
We've been on 20 minutes and
Oh
we've
my
gotten
God.
practically
We
nowhere.
got
We better get
practically
busy.
nowhere.
here.
This hour's going real fast, folks. But we'll get it all in, and you can still watch the Red Sox starting with the first pitch at 8:09. So don't worry about it. We're going to get there. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back, and we'll get on to the subjects that we really wanted to talk about, which is the 2 constitutional amendments and the recent decisions we've had, one very recent, affecting voting rights in the state of New Hampshire. Should be of concern to all of us. We'll be right back. Okay, folks, we're back with our second segment on the progress report for this Wednesday, October 24th. Our first segment was a little short because we were a little late getting going. I apologize for that. I wanted to come back to Jeannie with talking about question one, which would restore a 150-year tradition of New Hampshire citizens having status to sue the government to claim that their tax dollars are being expended illegally merely because they paid those taxes. And the reaction I'm getting to this from the people that have doubts about it is a concern about, will this overwhelm our courts with a flood of the phrases frivolous lawsuits?
But we
the
had
great
it for 150 years, and it didn't.
Well, that would seem to be part of an answer.
I think that's a great answer.
Jeepers creepers, we
But
have
that-
experience
but that
beyond.
that is the argument that
Yeah.
I hear. And they're particularly worried about, we have these special interest groups like, for some people.
Like
it's
the ACLU.
Yeah, the ACLU, or the Libertarians, or the Free Staters, and they will be constantly trying to keep the government from doing its proper function by bringing lawsuits. So go ahead, tell us the answer.
I think that what you said is actually a big part of the answer, which is we had taxpayers standing for 150 years, and courts weren't overwhelmed with this flood of frivolous lawsuits. So we don't expect that to happen here. And I would also note that government accountability should be an absolute priority that we have.
It should be easy, not difficult.
Yeah,
right?
and so if that means that a couple of frivolous cases are filed, to me, to us, that's a price worth paying to have government accountability, because the alternative, like you said, is basically to put a lock on the door to the courthouse and say, good luck getting in. The government's going to do what it's going to do, and you're just going to have to stand there.
And no one else is there to take up your cause. Let me ask this, and it kind of plays into what you asked, Bob. You called it a tradition of taxpayers standing for 150 years. Well, that came from somewhere. That had to be based either in our common law or in our Constitution. It didn't just rise up. So how did the Supreme Court stop that tradition, or what was the law prior to that time? What was their argument?
I'm not sure actually where it originates. I think of it as an accountability measure, right? I think New Hampshire has gone above and beyond other states in trying to make government accountability a priority. Where it originated, I'm not actually sure, but it's certainly been a pillar of our state history.
No, I just wonder how they, it's something that it had to come from somewhere, and how do you shut it down? We were wrong all this time? I don't understand it.
Well, a lot of us don't understand it. As you said, 150 years we did not have a problem with this. And New Hampshire prides itself on, we have more democracy, we have more elections, we have town meetings, we have this governor's councils, a check on the governor, and
Couldn't
we
be a
have all these-
result-oriented decision, could it? Where they weren't trying to get to a particular result, and that was the only way to do it?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I wonder. Our Supreme Court is pure as the driven snow, right?
No.
We've
they're
never
not.
had a
No,
scandal
they're
up there.
not. No, they're not. No, they're not.
Sorry.
I don't want to
interrupting
put them in the
again.
same box as the U.S. Supreme Court, but there are some problems. What do you think? Is this are we doing what we need to do to? I believe this will pass if the voters understand what's at stake. Are we doing what we need to help the voters to understand that this just restores a right that New Hampshire citizens have long had and was taken away in a very, I think, ill-considered, ill-argued Supreme Court decision?
We're trying. I think you hit the nail on the head, and that the issue is voter education. I've talked to a number of people who just don't know, A, that the ballot measures exist, or B, know that they are there but don't really know what they are or what they're about. And I do worry that people, if they go into the ballot box not knowing exactly what the ballot measures are, they're going to lean toward against voting for them. And so we're trying, we're doing, shows like this, we're doing op-eds, we're talking to folks, really trying to help people understand how important these ballot measures are.
So if you just walk into the voting booth, and we'll get to question 2, but you're going to see all the people you can vote for, and if you get all the way to the bottom of the ballot, please go all the way to the bottom of the ballot. Vote for everyone you can. You're going to see this question, and it's going to ask, are you in favor of, and perhaps you could read the language because it's going to be complicated. And people are going to see that, and they're going to think that this comes out of nowhere. They're not going to realize we've been doing it this way for 150 years. We just want to go back to the way we've always done it. They're going to think, oh my God, this is a radical change to the way we've been doing things. There's going to be a flood of frivolous lawsuits. But
Yeah.
if they realize, no, this is actually how it's been every year of this state, except last year and the year
Yeah.
before, then they'll be. It's easier for them to swallow, I think, and certainly easier them to affirmatively vote for, because you need a supermajority in the population as well.
The ballot doesn't include an explanation. It doesn't
Right.
say, in essence, this translates to government accountability, vote yes or no, right? I can read it, it's long. The tax.
That's the problem. People read this thing, they don't
Yeah.
understand. I'm voting no. I don't know what this is going to do.
That's people's knee-jerk reaction with constitutional amendments, is generally people oppose amending the Constitution unless it's for a really
And this
serious
is
issue.
restoring. This is a
Right.
restoration of the Constitution as we know it.
And it has strong bipartisan support.
Yeah.
It does.
This one was
Both political party
overwhelmingly
leadership has
bipartisan.
endorsed this.
Well, I don't see them
Yeah.
putting signs on my lawn.
There are actually yard signs that are around that say
Yeah, there are
Republicans and
some yard signs.
Democrats
Yes on
agree,
one.
vote yes on one.
Then I have to get
That
me
is
one.
that is the political action committee that I'm a part of. That
Yeah.
yes,
And you
on
haven't
one.
given me a sign. Come on, Bob. Get on it.
I don't have any signs, but I'll get you one. I will.
That's an important issue, though. The vote was 309 to 9 in the House. It is a rare day in history that you have that many reps agreeing on anything. And then in the Senate, it was 22 to 2. That shows
Right.
overwhelming
Restoring the New Hampshire
bipartisan
Constitution
support.
that we all know and love is what this is all about.
Yeah.
But it's not going to look like that when
Yeah.
you walk into
and
the
I
ballot.
should know the ACLU is nonpartisan. We don't endorse parties. We don't endorse candidates. So we don't come at either of these issues from a partisan standpoint. We come at these issues from a constitutional standpoint, and really do believe that both of these further civil rights.
Could you take a deep breath? I know it's long, and read it to us so that,
Sure.
at least for our viewers, it won't be the first time they see this language.
So this is ballot question 1. This is what would be added to the Constitution. The public also has a right to an orderly, lawful, and accountable government. Therefore, any individual taxpayer eligible to vote in the state shall have standing to petition the Superior Court to declare whether the state or political subdivision in which the taxpayer resides has spent or has approved spending public funds in violation of a law, ordinance, or constitutional provision. In such a case, the taxpayer shall not have to demonstrate that his or her personal rights were impaired or prejudiced beyond his or her status as a taxpayer. However, this right shall not apply when the challenged governmental action is the subject of a judicial or administrative decision from which there is a right of repeal by statute or otherwise by the parties to that proceeding.
Okay. And unfortunately, the
Long
reason
but clear.
there's going to be no explanation of this on the ballot you're going to get, folks. And that's because a couple of years ago, the legislature decided that any constitutional amendment that went on the ballot, all the explanatory language would have to be included in the resolution that has to be voted on by the House and the Senate. And frankly, we didn't know that. We forgot about that. So this is a real important educational effort we're making to understand that this is real important. This is our one chance, probably for a very long time, to give back to the New Hampshire citizens something they had a right to for 150 years. If you think the government is diverting your money to an illegal purpose, this gives you a chance to go to court and do this.
You don't have that chance today, but if you vote for this provision, you will have that chance next year.
And I would just add that in the issue of that I raised sort of as a devil's advocate here, the claim of frivolous lawsuits, the courts have lots of remedies to deal with frivolous lawsuits, including motions to dismiss, motions for summary judgment, even imposing of costs on the party who brings a frivolous case. They have those remedies available. So the court will not be without remedies if this right that be given to New Hampshire citizens is seriously abused. So, okay, we're right on that one. Let's talk about Constitutional Amendment 2. Which for the first time would put in the New Hampshire Constitution something expressly recognizing the right of privacy. This didn't pass by quite the same margin, but it's going to be on the ballot. You want to talk
Well,
about
it
that?
passed by a supermajority in both houses. That's pretty
Correct.
substantial.
It's still a bipartisan majority. So this one is easier to read. We'll just start with the language. It reads, an individual's right to live free from governmental intrusion in private or personal information is natural, essential, and inherent. Basically a constitutional right to privacy. Right now, even though New Hampshire is considered a national leader when it comes to privacy, the word privacy shows up 0 times in our
But we have the
Constitution.
motto, live free or die. We have that motto, which
Yeah.
is cited in court cases, in speeches. That doesn't carry the same
That
weight.
doesn't do it. So where our privacy rights come from now a lot is a search and seizure provision that was written many, many generations ago. More importantly, it was written before the internet was invented, before the internet was even possibly conceived of.
And is that language to be secure in their papers, that kind of a thing?
Exactly, their house, their persons, things that were tangible back when the provision was written. The struggle is trying to apply that to the array of threats to privacy that we have today. We have facial recognition, we have DNA harvesting, we have iris scans, things that I have trouble conceiving of, and they actually exist. And so we're trying to create a constitutional right to privacy that responds to that level of technological innovation. Because the search and seizure provision is really outdated when it comes to that type of technological threat.
So there's been some pushback on this.
A little.
And I'm going to give you some. You already discern where the source of this is, but I'm going to just tell you. There are people that think this sounds great. The language is lovely. We all would like to have language like this. But that there are some maybe practical consequences that could be a problem. Surveillance cameras in jails or in courts. Is that, there may be a good reason to have surveillance cameras in jails or in courts. That could be an intrusive thing. And there's no balancing test, as I understand it, in this law, in this constitutional amendment. How do we know that this wouldn't be interpreted to kind of ban that kind of protective
The
activity?
court would employ the balancing test
Right.
you're talking about. And
Correct.
every constitutional provision since Madison versus Marbury, or Marbury versus Madison, has been interpreted by the courts.
Constitutional rights are not
And they
absolute.
apply balancing
No
tests.
constitutional
And
rights,
it's,
absolute.
you know, they do this, if they want it to be a right, they apply one test. It, you know, it's all result oriented, of course, but, I
Yeah.
mean, they're going to apply those same tests.
And that's, I'm going to hire you as a spokesperson on this issue. Because if you think of the First Amendment, you think of the Second Amendment, you think of any of our, premier U.S. Bill of Rights, none of those are absolute. But they don't say that. It doesn't say you have a right to free speech, but this is not an absolute right.
And even when
That's
they do say
inherent.
well-ordered militia, that the court can ignore that.
Yeah, and so when you have it explicitly doesn't say that this is absolute. It says it's natural and essential and inherent. And that language, by the way, is not random. That was not plucked out of the sky. Natural, essential, and inherent already shows up in our Constitution. It comes from Part 1, Article 2. So that kind of broad language is actually the type of language you find in a constitution, because constitutions are not meant to be case specific. They're meant to be broad principles that can be applied to any array of circumstances. The narrower and more specific you make a constitutional provision, the fewer circumstances that it will apply to, and therefore the less useful it is.
And we use
to
statutes
courts.
for that kind of thing.
Exactly. Courts are where you go into
And-
detail,
and-
where you
and
go
then-
into prescriptive language.
And then if a statute does, it comes into question and someone has taxpayer standing to question it, they'll be able to get up and go to court, and the
Right.
court will decide how much privacy rights we have.
Well,
And we'll
in
either
the
agree or
Fourth
disagree.
The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, it says unreasonable search and seizures are illegal. The word reasonable is in there. There's no word reasonable in this amendment, is there?
No, but courts, like you said, courts conduct a balancing test. The way that this will be interpreted by courts is that the government still can still acquire personal and private information, but they'd have to get a warrant first. This is what it protects police, law enforcement from taking your information simply because they can. It prevents
Right.
fishing
They've-
expeditions.
They've got your license plate on a camera, so
Yeah.
they store it and they deal with it. And by the way, I want to point out, the unreasonable search and seizure that is prohibited is an action of the government. This constitutional amendment is talking about the individual, not the government's action against him. It's talking about the right he possesses and defensible against the government. So they're two different things. You can't, the reasonableness is imposed upon the government, not upon the individual who holds the right.
What about smart meters? I'm very interested in energy stuff, as you probably know. That's my wheelhouse, really. I'm in the ranking member of the House Science, Technology, Energy Committee, and we are looking forward to having smart meters, because help people control their energy use, save energy. But these could be considered quite intrusive and an invasion of privacy, because The
the government-
utility company's gonna know when you're washing your dishes.
They're not the government,
So I'm
though.
technologically ignorant. What is a smart meter?
A smart meter is something that can provide information to you, but your utility company will know it about what energy you're using and when and for what purposes.
So this doesn't apply
That's
to
not
a
the
company.
government,
This
though, yeah.
applies to the government. But here's how it would apply.
Well, these are government-regulated entities, utilities.
Right. So speaking of utilities, I usually use the example of internet companies, right? Think of how much information Verizon or Comcast has on you based on your cell phone usage, your internet usage. Right now, police can go to those third parties, right, and acquire your personal information. The way that this would work is that the police couldn't go around you by going to Verizon. The only way Verizon could hand over your personal information is if the police obtained a warrant or if you had signed a waiver.
And the same thing would apply to the smart meter. The utility company, it needs this information to do its business, but it can't just give it to a cop.
Right.
The cop needs a warrant.
So what's happening with the education on question 2?
So the pushback that you gave is exactly the pushback we're trying to counter, which is that it's too vague, it's too broad, I don't really know what this means. And what we're trying to say is it's intentionally broad, it's intentionally
Oh, and by
vague.
the way, they do know what it means. They do know what it means. Everybody knows
Yeah.
what it means. Everybody has an opinion on what it means and what it means to them, and we'll duke it out in the courts like we do everything else.
And I just add that when you were talking about unreasonable searches and seizures, a whole body of case law has developed from the Fourth Amendment. The stop and frisk that we see, where the police, when they have reasonable suspicion, can stop you and pat you down. Reasonable suspicion, stop and frisk, those don't appear in the Constitution either. Those are sort of judicial interpretations of the amendment, of the type of thing we'd expect to see with
And
the
that,
amendment in
that will
question 2.
absolutely happen with this, right? If this is enacted, courts will interpret it and will acquire case law. That's the way the system is meant to work. And I would just know, I was looking through our state Bill of Rights today, trying to look at other vague principles that we have. And one of them, the right to own property, right? We have a right to acquire, possess, and protect property. The word property isn't defined. Acquire, you could easily say, okay, but does that
I have
mean
a
you
right
can
to
just
steal
go
it.
and steal your neighbor's property? Well, no, let's be practical in our implementation of this. And we would do the same thing with this, right? Like, let's not jump to unreasonable interpretations. The goal here is to say that you have a right to privacy in your personal information. The police should not be able to go and pluck your coffee cup out of the Dunkin' Donuts trash and go run your DNA and add it to its DNA database for future use.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think defending the right of privacy may be an actual lost cause in our...
No.
No, it's very, very important.
That's the danger. We
Yeah.
have got to push back on
That's
that.
the same thing as saying that Trump's okay because I'm tired of it.
Yeah,
That's-
we
that's-
have got to protect
Yeah,
the right to
absolutely.
privacy. In today's day and age, when you have a cell phone, you have a laptop, you have all that information out there, do not think that, well, you know what, I'm just going to accept that it's out there and the Russians can have at it and the government can have at it. No. We can protect privacy. We can do it with a constitutional amendment like
You've got no
Q2.
privacy anymore against surveillance cameras. They're everywhere. They're watching you all the time.
Well, that's why we need
Your computer's
this.
watching you all the time.
We actually had a bill in the legislature last session specifically to protect you against surveillance when you are on private property. And it was voted down, which was very unfortunate because I think it is something absolutely needed for exactly the reasons you're talking about.
We also have stickers that people can put over their webcams.
Yes, ACLU stickers, please come to our office and pick them up. You put
No
them over
kidding.
your cell phone camera or you put them over the little camera on your laptop.
Yeah?
You shouldn't have to do that, though. You should have a constitutional right to privacy.
I think that would be as effective as the stickers.
You use
It
both.
could be with taxpayer
Yes,
standing, I
yeah.
think. It very much could be.
Okay, I guess it's time for our second and last break.
Yeah, we got to take you out back and straighten you out, Bob. I tell you, man.
Privacy
bring 'em
is
on
a
the
New
show and then
Hampshire value.
argue against them and
We'll be coming back, folks, and we will. We'll talk about the Voting Rights Act.
change the name of the show to the Reactionary
is the-
Report.
Jesus Christ. Holy smokes. Dangerous hour on TV, indeed. We'll be right back, and we'll move over to Henry to talk about the two decisions we've had one from our state Supreme Court, one recently from our Superior Court, dealing with the issue of voting rights and the attempt by the General Court to cut back on voting rights, particularly for our young citizens who are attending colleges and universities in the state of New Hampshire. We'll be right back to talk about that in just a very brief break. Okay, folks, this is the progress report for Wednesday, October 24th. Just a few minutes away from the start of the second World Series game at Fenway Park. But to use those few minutes to be educated, informed by us here on the progress report. And if you're just joining us, we have two wonderful guests. We have Jeannie Haraska, Policy Director for the ACLU New Hampshire. And we've been talking about the two constitutional amendments on the ballot. And I hope you will educate yourself about those amendments and be informed and vote on them. They are very important. I think I'm inclined to support both, certainly inclined to support question 1. And they've made a very compelling case to support question 2, dealing with privacy as well.
Glad to see you've come to your senses, Bob. That break worked.
Tepid endorsement,
We
but
roughed
there
them
it
up a
is.
bit.
But I want to now turn to Henry, let me see, Henry, where were we?
Clementowicz.
Yeah, Clementowicz. I had the wrong piece of paper in front of me here. A staff attorney with the ACLU New Hampshire, having come to that position, becoming a lawyer, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in New Hampshire, live on the seacoast. It's wonderful to be back in New Hampshire. I came back after school.
Where was school, by the way?
Columbia and Georgetown.
Okay,
Yep.
I've heard of them.
Yep. So now I'm back working with the ACLU. Very excited to talk about some of these election law issues that have come up and voting rights issues. Just a disclaimer for your viewers, prior to joining the ACLU, I was involved in the SB3 lawsuit on behalf of the plaintiffs, but I'm here today talking on behalf of the ACLU of New Hampshire.
Okay, that's fine. So, this decision, it's been covered in the press, and it well should be. It's a very important decision, I think, because we had a Superior Court judge, Circuit Court
Well,
judge.
before we get to the decision, can we lay the foundation? We had a law passed that
Yes,
would,
please.
I believe, I'm going to characterize it as restricted voting accessibility to certain individuals. Could you kind of give us
Sure.
a thumbnail of where we stood?
Yeah, thank you.
So what SB3 did, and this was passed in 2017, was it changed the requirements to prove domicile, which is one of the 4 qualifications for voting in New Hampshire.
It's not residency.
It's not residency. It's identity, age, citizenship, and domicile. And prior to SB3, proving domicile was just like anything else. You show up with documentation if you have it. If you don't, you sign a sworn statement under the penalties of voter fraud, and that's it. You're registered to vote. You cast a ballot. SB3 did 2 things. It divided registrants into those who were registering more than 30 days before an election and those who were not. And for people who were registering more than 30 days before an election, if they did not have proof of domicile, they couldn't register to vote at that time. They'd have
So
to
they
come
couldn't
back.
sign the affidavit.
That's right. The affidavit was removed for that period of time. For those who are registering more within 30 days or on election day, it changed the form and it added hundreds of new words of confusing language, and it essentially presented a registrant with 2 options. If you had proof of domicile but not with you, you had to promise to come back within 10 days or in some smaller towns 30 days to the town clerk's office and give the proof of domicile under penalties of civil and criminal
What
prosecution.
would be examples of proof of domicile?
Well, so for example, a driver's license with your current address, or a lease with your name on it and the address, or a deed to your house, proof that you'd enrolled a child in a local public school district, for example. Those are some of the types of proof of
A
domicile.
utility bill, that kind of thing?
Utility bills, yes. There was some question as to what other types of mails would be accepted, and that's, part of the confusion was it wasn't really clear from town to town. It could be different whether, for example, a birthday card could be accepted as proof of domicile.
But I want to focus in on the threat of penalty. That, to me, is the state intimidation of a potential voter.
Sure. So we had, to my knowledge, this was the first such law in the country that criminalized simple failure to return paperwork. Now, the law says either knowingly and purposefully or knowingly or purposefully, depending on where you look. If you do that and with that mindset and don't return the proof of domicile after saying you would, you were subject to a $5,000 fine or potential misdemeanor voter fraud. Now, that provision, as we were discussing, had been enjoined by Judge Temple in 2017, but he allowed much of the rest of the law to stand.
The language on the form.
The language on the form,
30-day.
right, which created this new confusing language and could lead to longer lines at the polls. And a 2-week trial was held on a preliminary injunction in front of Judge Brown this most recent August, and on Monday, he issued an order finding these changes to the forms to be unconstitutional. So that takes us back to where we were in 2016.
And now, this isn't the final, this is a temporary restraining order. It will carry us through the election, will it not?
Well, that's an interesting question. So today, the state filed a motion for a status conference or clarification in the Superior Court, and at the same time filed an emergency motion to stay at the Supreme Court. Casey McDermott from New Hampshire Public Radio has reported that a hearing will be held in Superior Court tomorrow, so stay tuned on what's going to happen. It's
And
certainly
that'll be in front
rapidly
of Judge
moving.
Brown?
In front of Judge Brown, I believe, yes. And
Will you be there?
the ACLU is not a part of this lawsuit, but if I can convince my boss to let me go and watch, I may well be. But a lot of competent lawyers on both sides are going to be arguing this thing.
So it may be that the state now is trying to get involved and perhaps accelerate things so that they may turn this back around prior to election, and this law can go into effect. Obviously, the Attorney General's office is defending the statute.
That's right. The Attorney General's office, and they also have a private law firm as well who's helping them out. And that's right. They're asking the Supreme Court basically to put Judge Brown's order on hold before the election.
So I imagine the proponents of SB 3 will say, as the court, as they did in the legislature, all we're doing is trying to make sure that domicile depends on something more than your say-so, that you're here and with a permanent, with no intention to leave to another place, right?
Right. Well, so Judge Brown heard from over 20 witnesses, including several experts on voting fraud, and conducted what I think is a very thoughtful and thorough analysis where he weighed the burdens on eligible voters against the state's interest. And basically what he said was, after hearing from these experts on voter fraud, that he didn't think that SB 3 actually did anything to prevent voter fraud.
Why is that?
Because of because people could still register to vote on Election Day even if they wanted to commit fraud. This doesn't stop them. It just created more paperwork, basically.
Well, very interesting. And the case is obviously not over. Things are happening, maybe in the Supreme Court,
Things are happening, and
maybe in Judge Brown's courtroom too. I don't
right?
know.
Maybe by your next show, your viewers will have another update on the state of New Hampshire
Yeah,
election
yeah.
law.
I wonder
Well,
how
we will
long
keep them
has the
posted.
Secretary of State's office got to deal with whether they got to do these forms or not? Getting close.
It's a good question, and I certainly hope that the Secretary of State's office is preparing for all contingencies. You're absolutely right. We have an election coming up in, I think, 13 days.
Yep.
And they're charged with maintaining an orderly administration of the upcoming election. And, they've had time to prepare for this. I mean, this lawsuit has been coming for a year. So maybe they've made contingency plans.
I would think they've got pads of the old forms. Hopefully, they haven't tossed them all out.
Right, right.
Now, there's another decision that was a little earlier than this, and that was an advisory opinion from the New Hampshire Supreme Court on another bill, House Bill 1264, I believe, also dealing with the issue of domicile and residency. Can you tell us how these two decisions relate, if they do? I know that Judge Brown's decision did not at all refer to the Supreme Court advisory opinion, but what was that about, and what did that do?
Sure. So HB 1264 changed the definition of residency in New Hampshire. So essentially, prior to 1264, a resident of New Hampshire was a domiciliary who intended to remain indefinitely. So you could be a domiciliary under New Hampshire law prior to 1264. And if you didn't intend to remain in New Hampshire indefinitely, say you came here for 2 years, you thought it was home, but you knew you were going to leave at the end of your contract with City Year or in the military, or you graduated from college, you wouldn't be a resident. And residence has a couple other requirements under New Hampshire law. For example, if you have a car, you have to register it in New Hampshire within a time period. And if you have a driver's license, you have to switch that over to be a New Hampshire driver's license within the time period. So what HB 1264 did was it changed the definition of resident to be the same as domicile. Now, it's important for your viewers and listeners to know that 1264 has not come into effect yet. It doesn't take effect until July of 2019, so it's not going to impact anyone right now. But in the future, what it means is that if you register to vote, you're going to have to register your car here, and you're going to have to pay to get a driver's license in New Hampshire. And as we all know, registering your car in New Hampshire can be hundreds of dollars. So that's something that we're concerned about.
You know, I'm having a memory of when I went away to school. I intended to return to New Hampshire. I voted by absentee ballot in New Hampshire. I kept a New Hampshire driver's license. I was domiciled in Louisiana, but I was a resident of New Hampshire.
Right.
What happens to a person like me? A change in law here, if I were in Louisiana, still have the distinction between domicile and resident.
So I'm not entirely sure what the laws
I guess
are like.
probably an unfair question, but you
in
understand what I'm
Louisiana.
saying? Is it good policy? The separation of domicile and residence had policy reasons behind it.
It did.
And now is it good policy to combine those two to where they're equal? It seems to me like bad policy with unintended consequences.
Right. Our concern is really that we support making elections secure and accessible to all eligible voters, and our position is that there shouldn't be barriers making it harder for eligible voters to vote in New Hampshire. And
Like a $400 car registration fee.
Exactly, like a registration fee. I registered my car a few months ago, and boy, hundreds of dollars. And I'm a resident of New Hampshire. I live here. I intend to remain indefinitely, so that's all well and good. But there are people who now, starting in July of 2019, will have to start paying money when they register to vote, and that kind of thing. It doesn't make our
Is
elections.
that a poll tax?
Well, we would argue that it is.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Simple answer, yes.
Yes.
Feels like one to me. I'm sure that there are very filigrees of argument that would say it's not, but it really feels like one
It
to
puts
me.
a price tag on the ballot.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. So the reality is that most of this deals with our college students that are going to colleges here, whether Dartmouth, UNH, or any of other fine colleges, and they want to vote here, but they don't want to register their cars here. Or maybe they don't even have cars, but if they have cars, they don't want to register them here. If they're gonna participate in the political process in New Hampshire by voting here, why shouldn't they indicate that they have a connection to the community by complying with, driver's licenses and registering cars?
Well, they were indicating that they had a connection to the community by registering to vote here, and
It's
that's
domicile.
that's
They
the
live
fee.
here.
Exactly. That's the domicile, and it was that you couldn't become a resident if you didn't intend to remain indefinitely. And so there's this category of people who, New Hampshire's their home, and it's an increasingly transient world in which we live. And it's not just college students. Other people can be impacted. Substitute teachers coming in on a short-term contract, volunteers with Teach for America, or other civil rights groups like that, people who are stationed here in the military. They may not know how long they're going to be here, and it may be, for example, you get stationed in New Hampshire in the military, or say you work at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, but you live in New Hampshire. You come, you register to vote, you register your car here, but then all of a sudden you get shipped out somewhere else. Well, now do you have to register your car there again? And how many times do you have to register your car in a year?
Just to get to vote.
Just to get to vote.
And I would note that paying DMV fees does not demonstrate a commitment to your community. It demonstrates a commitment to the DMV. A commitment to your community.
Your own mobility, maybe.
Yeah, is going to church, it's going to school, it's paying
That utility bill that we were talking
It's paying
about.
your utility bill, paying rent, right? Think of all the
Coming
New
on
Hampshire
Manchester Public
businesses
Television.
that
Right.
rely on students, that rely on members of the military, that rely on workers here who are on contracts. All of those people are invested in our community.
And I think there's more to it than that. I'm going to use my example again. I lived in Louisiana for an extended period of time. I got to know the place. I liked the place, but I never for a minute wanted to leave New Hampshire. And to make me declare Louisiana as a resident if I wanted to vote there, which I didn't. I voted by absentee. That was my opportunity. But it seems to me that it's forcing more out of a person to get them into the ballot box. And what we should be trying to do is get more people to vote in the community that they live in.
Right. We want to just make it easier for people who are eligible voters to vote in New Hampshire, because we know that there are, disproportionate groups of people can be disproportionately impacted. So Judge Brown wrote in his order that based on expert testimony that he saw, that there were groups of New Hampshire residents and domiciliaries that would be more impacted than others. Young people, movers, the homeless, for example, were people who, for one reason or another, would have a more difficult time complying with SB 3.
but are absolutely eligible to vote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's the next step in this? We know that there's going to be some hearings, so I guess we can't tell, and we're being told it's time to wrap up. So maybe within 10 or 15 seconds, where does this go?
Well, I certainly hope that the New Hampshire Supreme Court and Judge Brown recognize that this order, which was thoughtful and thoroughly crafted after reading, I can tell you, a lot of briefs, a lot of evidence, a lot of expert testimony, that they realize that he got it right. And maybe you'll have me back in a couple weeks when we know
We can
more.
explain it.
We may just do that.
All right.
I want to thank you both for coming down and joining us. I know it was fairly short notice. And Jeannie, particularly thank you for bringing Henry along as a real expert on these things. This is really important. You know, I like to say we have all this uproar about people voting who shouldn't, which is a minuscule, if not a non-existent problem. The real scandal in this country is not enough people vote. So please vote. Please vote on November 6th. Nothing has ever been more important in terms of voting than this election we
Left,
got
right, or
coming
center,
up.
get out there and vote.
We got to get out there and vote. We got to do it. It's so, so important as we watch the news unfold today about what's happening with the bomb threats to the people that Trump has denounced around the country. Just
The
appalling.
ballot box is the only solution to
The
that.
ballot box is the only solution. It's not a complete solution, but it's a necessary part of the solution. So we'll be back. Next week will be the last show before the election. We'll certainly have plenty to say about that.
Yeah, I think so.
Thanks for our viewers for watching us and our caller for calling in. And we'll be back next week with another edition of the Progress Report. Take care.